Hey Arjun, how you doing today?
Good, good, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Really excited to chat. I've been seeing your stuff on LinkedIn and think you have just an awesome background. So really excited to get into it.
Nah, 100%. It's been a while since I did any sort of like LinkedIn Live or podcast. This feels weird, but I'm glad I'm glad to just sit down with you and have a chat either way.
Yeah, of course. So could we start off with just briefly giving me a rundown of your background? One thing that like I love about your background and why I want to talk is just it's very clear that you've been a very early salesperson at a lot of startups. So just would love to hear about that.
Yeah, no, 100%. It all started off with Wingman, which got acquired by Clary. Now it's Clary Copilot. So I started there as the first sales hire, and then it just worked out well. And I think over the next couple of years, I went through like their 0 to 1 and like 1 to 10 sort of journey, and it was refreshing. It was a lot of chaos, but I loved it. So I want to do that again and again, clearly, and again. And then I've done that like almost 4 times now at Storyly, and I was again like the first sales hire here. We're going through like that 1 to 10 journey here, but I guess it's become my niche now. Nobody in like a larger sales org like wants to chat with me. It's mostly like 0 to 1, 1 to 10 early stage startups. Like, okay, let's talk, right? I think that's it's become my niche. I don't really choose it, but I guess it's my thing now, and you're gonna play to your strengths. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I wanted to chat about it is, I'm obviously a founder. A lot of people who I engage with are founders, and so this sort of like first sales hire is constantly talked about as being like a really important hire. When we were talking earlier, we kind of talked about some mistakes that you were just kind of you didn't get into it full of it. You're kind of hinting some mistakes you're seeing people make. So I wanted to get into that. If I'm a founder and I'm thinking about building a sales team, what should I not do? Like, what are the mistakes that you've been seeing?
I think a couple of things that I see fairly commonly, right? One is, of course, to bring someone like from Salesforce or like super successful large sales orgs where like they've thrived and done really well. Mainly because it's not the same thing at all, right? Like, you're not comparing oranges to oranges, apple to apple, whatever, right? So it's just that like I've been in slightly larger sales orgs where like you get a ton of enablement, you get a ton of stuff that you can sort of lean onto. And then you
Yep.
get into like that 0 to 1 journey. You know what that feels like, right? There's barely anything for you to like lean
Yeah,
onto. It's
totally.
like everything is moving so quickly, and it's just like a very different ball game, and it takes a while for like that like kick-ass A or like salesperson from like Salesforce or like a larger, more mature sales org to adapt to. I think that becomes that's something that I've seen a lot of founders end up doing that might not work out more times than it might. The other thing is I've also seen founders hire like too many folks, like that might be too senior, right?
You're saying too many like they're hiring just instead of starting with one, starting with four or something for their sales team.
Yeah, like 1 or 2, maybe not the number itself, but I've also seen like too much of experience that comes
Got
into
it.
play.
Got
Like
it.
I've seen like somebody who's like at a director level or like a
Oh,
senior
it's like, oh,
director
I got to
level
start my
or
sales team by
different
hiring a
arc.
VP of sales, and so we
Yeah,
hire
like
someone with yeah.
I don't know. I've seen it work in some cases too, but like in a lot of cases, again, if somebody's been like a senior director, like a VP of sales, again, if they've been in like a much larger, more mature sales org, it's going to just bring in a lot more complexities, and also it ends up being a scenario where like too many sort of cooks spoil the broth type of thing. Like everybody's like there's a couple of heavily like high experience and all of that, so everybody's both of these guys are like 2 3 people bringing in a lot of stuff, but then you don't know what you're doing anymore. So I would say keep it a little clean. Maybe hire like 2 A's that have just that like a little bit of that early stage experience, just a little bit, and then sort of equip them, let them go crazy, experiment, and figure out what works, or at least try and understand what's worked for the founders so far. That's another thing, right? I've seen founders
Yeah,
hire sales very much earlier on than they should have, because they haven't figured out like at least some part of the sales motion. Then you can't expect like your AE, like a new AE, to come in and figure that out for you. I'm assuming the founders should be able to do that quite a bit before like they want to enable a new AE. And yeah.
yeah, totally. And I think this advice kind of goes both ways. It's relevant to founders when they're making the decision, but it's also relevant to AEs. Like I think
Yep.
startups are cool now. There's probably a lot of AEs out there like, hey, maybe I want to do startups. maybe I'm kind of tired of working for this big company, and maybe working at a startup will give me an opportunity to be more creative, maybe have a broader scope of responsibilities, which I think is true, by the way. But I think it goes both ways. That if you're an AE making a decision on where to join, you probably need to think about what's this question, and then
Yep.
obviously if you're a founder, you need to think about this question. And so, like, to summarize what you're saying, you're basically saying there's the wrong profile, but there's also the wrong time.
Correct.
On the wrong profile of a sales rep, it's some things you've seen are not say these are universally not going to work out, but people who are at very pedigreed companies with very well established sales processes, and perhaps people who are too senior, who kind of maybe haven't done like roll up your sleeves sales for a while. It's like, yeah. And so,
Yeah.
and then the other thing you said on stage, it's like, you can't do it too early. This is what we did at Grain was like, we're kind of like, we're going to hire a founding E and they'll help us figure out the sales process. Didn't really work out, to be honest. And it was interesting because we hired someone who I think was fine. Like, I don't blame this person in hindsight. Like, the blame was way more on us. We kind of were just asking way too much of them. It's like we had a product that people would buy, and so we're like, oh, we should be able to sell it, because we were initially like product led. We got most of our business from product signups, people running their credit card, and we're like, oh, we want to augment it with sales. So we're like, oh, I mean, of course, people like our product, they're gonna buy it, and so like that was kind of ignorant, to be honest. And so I think we didn't set up this person for success. There's a lot of things we could get into on there, but does that sound right? Anything you'd add?
No, 100%. I think, and I truly agree. I think it is a two-way street, right? I think I've also seen enough reps just say, hey, like I wanna get into like that 0 to 1 or like 1 to 10 journey. It's not as easy as, or like fancy as it looks from the outside. That's for sure. Because I think it's also like a mindset thing. If you're like truly prepared to like thrive in a little bit of a chaotic situation and like hit the ground running with just like whatever you can grab and not like constantly. I don't know. Like I've noticed this is something that I end up doing, right? Like whenever our PMM or like enablement, we have a bunch of folks at Storyland now. We've been growing, so when like they come to me and like, hey, what do you need? Like, what do you need from me? Like, do you need like more assets, like decks and like one pages? And like, yeah, like I've sort of gotten used to like not having much, so I
Yeah,
can't think
right.
of what else I need. But I've seen that other reps who are so used to having all of those resources that are just there, they can't like do without any of them or like at least so much as that. So yeah, no, I think it should be a good fit from both angles, both from like the founders and like the A's or like sales reps that are looking to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because so I want to pull the thread on this. So it's like when you're talking about when is the right time, if I'm a founder and I'm looking to build a sales team, when is the right time to do this? Or if I'm a AE and I'm looking to join a startup, when is too early where I shouldn't join? So you said that they should have a little bit of this figured out, but I'm curious if you could say like what needs to be figured out ideally before a founding AE joins versus what can the founding AE help figure out? Let's dive into that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. It's not, again, like, it's not like a one size fits all type of scenario, but like, I can give you an example with Storylane when I joined these guys, right? Like, when I started looking at who they are, what they do, what they've been up to, I saw some like fucking crazy logos like Gong was a customer and Clary was a
Oh
customer
wow.
and some massive good logos like Nutanix on the cybersecurity space. And these are two like co-founder like are like the Soria's co-founders are both of them like come from like an engineering like tech background, super traditional tech background, absolutely not much experience in selling at all. And if these guys were closing all of these deals and the revenue also made a lot of sense. I've never seen like just two like non-sales founders do so
Mm,
much revenue
mm.
before they even thought of. In fact, when I reached out to Nalin, who's our CEO, he was like, "Yeah, we don't really plan on hiring like an AE yet." I'm like, "Yo, you guys are crazy." But so what I'm getting to is traction.
Right, right,
So
right. Okay, yeah.
traction was like there, right? And it's always easier for me to then go in and start looking at what's working for these guys, right? Because there's so much traction that they've done so
Right.
many demos, and then
Yep.
there are so many closed ones. So there's so much more data for me to start sort of ingesting and then digesting that shit. But take another example. I'm not going to name any companies, but then when I joined, they had like less than 10 customers, not a lot of traction at all. It was more like shit, like we have one demo in a week, we're gonna do like whatever we can with that one demo, so everybody is just scrambling and just sitting and waiting. It's crazy, right? Like you see what that momentum and traction
Interesting.
can do. It's two different scenarios. So yeah, so as a founder, I would say, hey, like am I seeing traction? Product market fit, right? Like in some ways, obviously, it's a term that means very different things for very different people and industries and whatnot. But like as long as you're seeing traction, you're able to like see that okay, we're consistently closing deals, and this seems to be working, or that seems to be working. The product is good. Like are we getting consistent feedback from why we're winning or losing deals to a certain degree? Then there's something to pass off to like your first sales hire and not
Yeah.
be like, you figure it out. I'm not gonna like tell you anything because I myself don't know much. If you're probably thinking that way, then you haven't done enough sales already or like figured out enough. I guess
Yeah.
you need to have some level of information to pass on to your AA, you know?
Yeah, I think this is the problem is like I think you can have traction in the wrong way. Like this is what happened with us as
Right.
Granny. Is like we had PLG traction. That's not the same as sales traction, right? It's like you need to have some proof of the buyer buying through the sales motion you're trying to build. I think if you're just like, hey, we have a product in the market, people are buying it, running credit cards, like that doesn't necessarily translate into sales. It's like you need to
Right.
whatever that motion is, if it's an
Right.
outbound motion or an inbound motion or a, you know, whatever it is, like you need to have some cycles, I think, of that working so that someone can come in. At least that would be my guess. There's probably sales reps out there that can figure it out, but I think it's going to be really hard if it's like we haven't sold a single deal and good luck. I also think another thing is you probably want to make sure you have enough volume, right? Or no? Do you think that doesn't matter?
Volume in terms of like your like
Well,
leads.
actually, let me ask this: do you is your out are you outbound at Storyly?
We do some outbound, but it's more of a recent like start. Like when I joined in, there was a
Hmm.
ton of inbound. So
Yeah.
yeah, so there was
So
one
that's what I'm
channel
talking
that
about.
was
Is like if
working really really well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is like if you're planning to do an inbound motion because that's just how your buyers want to buy, or your ACV
Mhm.
doesn't really make sense for outbound, like you have to make sure I think you have enough lead volume. I don't
Right.
think it's fair to like hire a founding AE and assume that they're going to, make up their own outbound process for this, in the meantime while you wait to get enough inbound volume. Unless outbound is your motion, that's fine. But then
Yeah.
again, the founder should have sold a bunch of outbound deals and make sure it's economically viable. Like I can consistently close outbound deals at
Mhm.
30K or 40K or 50K or whatever that
Yep.
sort of minimum
Yep.
threshold is for outbound to make sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. That is true. I think yeah, like you said, like the founders need to have like gone through some of those cycles themselves and like should have like some parts of those patterned down before they look to bring in someone else from the outside and then do that. But of course, like it's easier if you have like some like one of the channels working for you, either inbound or outbound or anything really. If one of the channels is working, like you said, I think if there is enough decent volume coming in, then you can always like learn on the job like that you could like as a founding you could come in not knowing enough about the space and like the product and all of that good stuff. Like this is the first time I'm selling to like product marketers. I've never interacted with product marketers in my entire life before this, but it's just like you have enough calls that you can hop onto and like have enough conversations. Some of those things you can crack along the way, but some of the basic things need to be understood, right? Like there needs to be
Right.
like yeah, there needs to be some level of understanding of like some like the space, like who your competitors are. Like for us, it's more around not necessarily educating prospects around why you need interactive demos or demo automation software. It's more around, hey, like I know you get it because it's a lot of inbound demos too. So
Mm.
I know that they
Mm.
get that they need something like this. It's more selling against competition and selling against competitors. Like why me? And you guys are in a fairly crowded space yourselves, right? Like you
Totally.
probably see this
Absolutely.
and like
Yep.
your sales motions too. So like the motion is more around why grain, why not anyone else, right? So those are like different types of sales motions altogether. You can't hire somebody who's not been in that crowded space selling against competition who's like, oh, like I work for Salesforce. I'm not even gonna bother telling you why me. It's just weird. Like so some of those
Yeah,
tiny
that's
like
interesting. What you're
underrated things
saying
need to
is
be
like you're
yeah.
saying like someone who's sold at Salesforce like a clear category leader never doesn't have experience like winning deals against winning competitive deals basically.
Where you're an underdog, right? Like imagine if you hired somebody at Gong. like Gong is a customer of ours. They're doing actually, and I've sold against these guys too, right? Like at Wingman, I used to sell against them. But you see that, right? Like Gong,
Right.
if somebody is in the market for conversation intelligence or like revenue intelligence, whatever you want to call them, call that today. But it's very different selling Gong versus selling something like a Wingman or a Grain or like anybody else, right? You're always, I mean, I love being the underdog in the equation because people already like
Mm.
you, like you're able to build trust even better. But it's just like two different ways to sell, and you can't expect one to do the other quickly, at least.
It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's assume you've joined the right company. If you're an AE as a founder, you've hired the right person. What is your typical like playbook? How do you just, I mean, how do you come in and start taking over sales as a founding AE? Like, what are some of the best things you've seen work? What are maybe some things that are less productive ways to get started in your experience?
I'd say, I mean, I've been saying and doing this for a while, which is go back, go listen to call recordings. Just go
Okay, there we go.
listen
I
to
like it.
all sorts of
I like it. I
calls.
did not pay him to say that.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's one of the first things that I request access to. Like when I accepted my offer at Storytel, like yo, can you guys like give me access to Grain? Like I mean, we used to have a different tool. We switched to Grain recently. It's been a year or so, I guess. But yeah, I like listening to calls. I've always done a lot of that. It feels like for me at least, it's one of those things that I constantly keep doing, even if I don't go listen to a call every day. Like at least in a week, I go and listen to a couple of different types of calls just to understand, like just to get a quick different perspective of what my peers are doing, what like other sellers are doing. It's not necessarily to like make notes and start learning and like switching up stuff or anything like that, but just to get that additional perspective, right? Otherwise, it's very easy for you to like be super close minded and just keep doing whatever you're
Right.
doing over and over and over again.
And the reason why I think listening to calls is so important is like it's direct data. It's not
Yeah.
filtered.
Yeah.
So it allows you to kind of come up with your own questions and your own point of view. A lot of times, if you're like, here's the playbook, and here's our persona that we have, in Notion. A lot of that has been like simplified,
Right.
reduced, et cetera, and like a lot of assumptions are made, and oftentimes that's useful, but it's also helpful to like just get the data and be like, oh, interesting. I would have thought this. And so can be some really great conversations at Grain.
Yeah.
Whenever we have a new person join, we give them playlists of calls to watch from sales, from product, like founders doing kind of like customer discovery type calls. And then we give them a document that's just like write down things that stand out to you that like
Yeah.
don't make sense based on what we're doing and what you're hearing, things you heard from the customers that sounded surprising, and that's just a great source of learning.
100%, 100%. It's a wealth of knowledge. I think it's still like, I think most reps still don't go listen to a lot of calls. I think they still go read notes. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that's interesting is like I think I love AI. Grain, we use a lot of AI, but it's sort of to me like the example is like Blinkist or these kind of like tools that give you a summary of books.
right. Yeah. Yep.
It's not the same as reading or listening to the book. Like it's
Yeah.
just like you might get the upshots, but like there's something about going through the richness of the journey of listening, all the details, where you can actually come up with your own point of view, get ideas or insights triggered that like you're not going to get if you just kind of like read the upshot. So it's
Yeah.
boring.
Yeah.
It can be boring. I guess it depends on your mindset. It's a little bit arduous because it doesn't feel like you're like getting things done, but it's totally worth it. Like it's absolutely worth it. And I think like I have this belief that's like every 1 hour of call I watch with my customers is like, several hours of saved time from bad decisions or from making bad assumptions. So
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I also look at it this way, right? Like the wheel doesn't have to be like constantly reinvented, right? You don't have to figure
yeah.
out shit that somebody else has already figured out for you. So like
Mm,
if you're not going to listen to calls of especially what your founders are saying and asking and things like that, you feel like you're taking on more responsibility than you really need to, right? Like you don't need to
right, right.
like
Yeah.
start digging in. Like there's some stuff that's already been figured out and it's
Totally,
there in some of
totally.
those
Yeah,
calls. So
totally.
like go grab them, right?
Yep.
So yeah,
Okay, so
call recordings for
start
sure.
with watching calls. What else? What else should you start doing? Like the playbook from day one.
I mean I spend a lot of time listening to calls, but apart from that, of course, I do chat with the founders a lot, like fairly regularly. at least in the first couple of months, I get them to go listen to like my calls, see what happened, where like because it's easier for them to be
Interesting.
able to identify some of those things that I might have done that they might have not even thought about, and then they're like, "Oh shit!
Mm,
Like, okay, looks like this worked out well for you, so we're all gonna try that and see where that leads us." So you're also bringing in that fresh perspective, right? Like, it's not all you, learning from them. It's also you trying to just do your thing or like do something your way that seems to be at sometimes better than whatever people were doing at some point. But the second thing also, which I sort of learned fairly late, I'm not a big uh, like fan of documentation. I'm a lazy guy. I don't like to document inherently. After the first couple of times where I was the founding AE and then I figured out shit and then we hired, like another AE, when they came to me, I had nothing to show to them, and that was kind of embarrassing, right? I was like, yeah, you know what? I was just doing my like, just go do your basics, right? It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
too crazy or anything. But then those guys would always look at me like, yeah, bro, like I think you're not telling me everything. It was a little embarrassing. So now I've started documenting a lot of stuff. Like I write down stuff. I make a lot of like Notion docs, etc. Like for like
nice.
not just scripts, like very specific things to say. Like very similar to how we've always had like these objection handling cheat sheets, right? Like
Right.
for like these five objections, here's how you respond, that sort of thing. I make some very tiny notes around very specific things that come up about a specific feature, like a competitor, like what is our pitch, that sort of thing. And I try and sort of, yeah, fine tune that. It's almost like, I think I've told this to like a couple of other founders. It's almost like for me, like in this like sort of setup where you're selling against competition, it's more like you being like a stand-up comic where you're constantly fine-tuning your like set.
Yep.
And
Interesting.
it doesn't have to be extremely different every single call. There's going to be a lot of the same stuff that you're going to have to say over and over again. It's all about where and how you say it and what's your tone, what's your delivery, and all of that stuff. So I make notes about a lot of that stuff and see what works for me and, that sort of thing. So documentation, I document a lot of that stuff and then I keep, yeah, as I do more calls, I keep like changing or tweaking some of those things to get to like that balance of sorts.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
so what I'm hearing is come in, watch calls. Two, start talking to customers, and then ask the founders to watch your calls. And learning can happen both ways. Three is you've got it. I love this idea of like you've got your set, which is like basically the basic anatomy of a call, and that you're refining your documentation on how to answer certain questions, maybe how to pitch certain things. So those are three so far. And I might have cut you off if you're thinking of one more.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it. I also like it depends on the kind of space that you're in, but I also feel like if you are in a bit of a crowded space where like, it's mostly selling against competition, I think it's most in SaaS, I think every single space there's tons of competitors, so it's going to be those situations either way. So I would do a lot of research on where your product truly is better than the rest of them and dig into that space, right? I think that's another thing that founding AEs need to do to succeed, which is build that acumen around in about the space that you are playing in so much so that you can have conversations around the space as much as your founders can have these conversations, right? Like most sales reps
Right. Right.
don't dig in as deep around the space. They don't necessarily have any opinions about where the space is headed towards, what's happening in the space, like the
And
industry
when
that
when you say
they
these
sell in.
reps, you're saying a lot of times sales reps who are for the 500th rep at X
Right,
big company.
right.
Yeah.
You're not
It's like
necessarily having those
they kind of just
conversations, right?
assume,
Right.
yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah. But
Yeah.
you're saying in
So
this scenario, it's actually really important that you do your own work to get your own point of view on these things.
yeah, or like you don't even need to get your own point of view, but at least get a point of view that resonates with you, right? Like your founder and
Right.
you could potentially think about this space or like that you play in somewhat similarly, but at least have and know that opinion because like for me when I sell against competition, I talk about this space a lot. I say like, hey, here's
Mm,
three other
mm.
competitors that you guys are probably going to be chatting with if you haven't already, but here's where I think each of us sort of have our pros and cons. And one of those guys who always brings up competitors before like my prospects do, and I've been made fun of
Yeah,
by
I
some of
was
the
going to
founders
say
I've
like
worked
there's a
with,
lot of people who would say don't bring up your competitors, like
right?
why but why do you believe you should do that as
I
opposed to
think
just
I think 10 years ago, you could be like an industry where like people might just look at you and then be like, oh, amazing tool. I'm going to go buy this
mm,
guy's,
mm,
whatever this guy's selling. But I think right now, everybody that I talk to is at least looking at two or three different vendors before they finalize and make a decision. And two,
mm.
everything is out there. Like what the
Yeah.
hell am I gonna try and gatekeep from these prospects that they don't already know, right? So they're going to be having these conversations with my competitors, so might as well talk about it and not pretend like, oh, I'm sitting alone in this well and selling this shit that nobody else apparently has. So might as well have that conversation.
Yeah.
At least you're more in control when you bring that up in your
Yeah, you
conversation.
get to frame it. That makes a lot
Right,
of sense. And
exactly.
do you think it
This
builds trust too?
100%, 100%. I
Yeah.
think it does until I think we get to a point where all of us are gonna start doing it, and then we all start sounding the same. I think
Yeah.
it's one of
Yeah.
those things about sales, right? Like if we all do
Yeah.
the same thing, this is best practice, then it's not gonna work for anyone. So you
Yeah. A
just
best
do
practice
like
done
the
by
exact
everyone
opposite.
is now a worse
It's not,
practice.
right? So it's just that. So I usually tell people, yeah, probably gonna look at X, you're probably gonna look at Y. Have you already looked at them? And then try and disarm them. It does build trust. And I also tell where they do well. And I think that is also key. It is almost counterintuitive to think about, oh, like why you like stating like the good aspects of your competitor's product, because it builds trust. It like they're gonna
Yeah.
listen to you. You can't all be like, oh, have you seen those comparison like sheets with like you versus like three of your other competitors where all of them
Yeah.
have
It's
big red
like
X
X X X X
X's?
X X X
Yeah, and
check
then
check
you
check
have
check check.
everything that
You're
you,
like, oh yeah, that's
yeah,
very objective analysis here.
right. So it's the same thing with sales, right? You can't sound
Yeah.
that way. You
Yeah.
can't be that comparison
Totally.
sheet that marketing is giving you for some
Makes
reason.
sense.
So it's just that.
I love that. I think that's a great tactic. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I would say like it's not something that I've like universally adopted, but as you're talking to me, I'm thinking like, yeah, we should probably do this. It makes a lot of sense. So I think as we kind of get into last time, just wrapping up, I'm curious in your last, we'll speak to the AEs out there, like how, if I am the 577th salesperson at a company and I'm just like, oh, I'd like to do something different. How would I know if, being a founding AE or joining a really early sales team is right for me? If it's worth even trying? What are the types of things like I should know about myself? Like what are the types of personality traits or whatever that are sort of it's this type of role is best for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna pretend like I know what I'm talking about here for like a big part. I
Well, at
landed
least for
up here
yourself.
like
At
I
least for
didn't
yourself.
plan for. Yeah, I didn't
Okay.
plan for this. I landed up in this like founding a sort of niche. But having said that, I think I look at two things if I were in that scenario that you just described, right? So one is talk to other founding AEs, talk to other like
Hmm.
sales reps that have been in that position that you are thinking about. And there's going to be like there's going to be a lot of positives. There's going to be a lot of like, oh shit, like that's the worst time I had selling and all of that stuff. And
Yeah.
I've had
Yeah.
both, right? So but at least get a good idea, get a good sense of what that objectively looks like and feels
Right.
like for you,
Right.
and think and be honest to yourself about, is this really something that you want to, because it is going
Right.
to be a bit of an uphill task from where you're coming, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is, I can't overstate how much of a role it plays to work with the right kind of founders, the right founders where
Interesting.
your thoughts around how to do business aligns with them too, not to like a massive like degree, because you're not like a co-founder or anything, you're just a founding AE, but at the same time you're going to be working with your founders
A lot. Yeah.
quite a bit,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're gonna have second thoughts about the founder, think about it. I guess have more thoughts about it, and then see if you really want it. And the third thing, I think the only time it really matters, at least the way I think about it, about am I excited to sell this product? Like if I'm like a 500 like sales rep, I don't need to be excited about whatever product I'm selling, because
That's interesting.
I can sort of be trained, and I can do like pick up
Yeah,
on
you can
things
follow
and
the you can follow
just
the
do it.
playbook, go through the motions. It
Yeah, right.
probably
There
you'll be
are,
fine.
yeah,
You're not going to be the best, but you'll be fine.
exactly, right. So
Yeah.
it's more the odds are still in your favor if that is the scenario. But like
Hmm.
if you are going to be a founding AE, I think it truly helps if you're excited about what you're selling.
Hmm.
And I've sold sales tech before, and because I was able to put like for grain, for instance, right? Like I was able to put myself in that user's shoes. It was
Yeah.
damn interesting. I was excited. I was super excited to sell that shit. So one of those things, right? It gives you that additional drive. It's almost like your like normal internal combustion engine already like suddenly has turbocharge for it. So it does help. It does help. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's like a deal breaker if you're not excited about the product, but it's gonna like, yeah, it's gonna push you quite far if you do. So those are three things that I would think about really.
I love that. One thing I will add is and it kind of dovetails on your point about liking the founders. In my experience, it's really helpful when you're collaborative. If you enjoy talking and collaborating with other people, like it can be really helpful, because the ones that have worked well for us is like they came to me and they're like, hey, this is what I'm seeing, what do you think? And we're just constantly like riffing. The people who have struggled are the ones who are like, I'm now the founding E, I'm going to figure this out, let me go off on my own, be a lone wolf. Or those who kind of just hide because they're like, I don't know if I want to talk to the founder, he might get mad at me, or he might. The thing you got to realize is like founders are probably wearing multiple hats, and when they're hiring you, they're kind of expecting to delegate some of it. That doesn't mean they don't still think it's super important. It just means like they've got a balance, and so you need to come to them and be very collaborative. And like you said, you're going to learn a lot from the founders about the customer, about what's worked in the past, what hasn't worked, and they're going to learn from you. But if you kind of go off on your own, that's probably not going to be the recipe for success.
No, that is true. I think like yeah, as a founding A, you are going to be talking a lot, not just with like founders, right? Like these conversations are going to happen like with a lot with like your marketing
Product
team, with
people,
your product,
developers,
with your
marketing, yeah.
yeah, exactly, everybody. And I remember like even at Wingman, we used to do like a lot of brainstorming sessions where I was asked for my opinion way too much to a point where like yo like I've shared whatever the fuck I can think about. I can't think about anything else. But yeah, but it was great. It was great. Even in
Yeah,
hindsight, I wish there was that level of collaboration in a lot of other startups also. But it is true. Yeah, I think it helps if you are collaborative and if you are at least ready to make that change. If you are not like that right now, so
totally.
100% agree with that.
Amazing. Arjun, this has been so fun to chat. People who want to follow you and see what you're up to, where can they find you?
I think LinkedIn is great. I post once a month when I truly have something to say that I think hits hard. But otherwise, I go with some low lift memes. But yeah, LinkedIn.
Amazing. All right, Arjun, great to chat. I hope to keep in touch and wish you all the best at Story Lane.
Now 100%. This was great, Jeff. Thanks for having me, and all the best with you and Grain too.
All right, cheers.
Cheers, guys.